welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
Jackson Keller phoning it in.
Okay, you know, the obvious joke here is for me to just be like, well, that was the end of the podcast. We're calling it here. That sucked. But like, I feel like I've done that too much. I feel like you tend to come at us with these horrible introductions, and my immediate response is usually one of the same. So I'm trying to get a little meta with this one and acknowledge that despite the fact that I really just want to say that fucking sucked and I don't want to do this podcast anymore, that I can't do that because I have to keep things fresh. I have to still, like, we're a film pod or a media podcast first and foremost, but like we obviously try and inject some humor into it, keep some levity to it. And like you can't just to take the name of the podcast, you can't just beat a dead horse when it comes to comedy. You can't just use the same joke again and again. So while you spice up these intros in new and terrible ways every week, I'm usually left just being like, this fucking sucks and I don't want to do this podcast with you. So hopefully this has been meta enough that you all understand my struggle. Because Jackson, that fucking sucked and I don't want to do this podcast with you.
I mean, listen, I gave you an out. I said phoning it in instead of phoning home. You could have phoned it in, but you didn't. That's the commitment to the bit that we like to see from you.
What can I say? One of us has to bring some effort to this podcast, and it's clearly not going to be you.
Is it ever?
So this week we are continuing our blockbuster weeks, a look back at the past 5 decades of summer blockbusters, mostly with the most expensive blockbuster of that decade, with some shuffling around, some little tricks and weaselly ways that we've spiced this up to make it a little bit more interesting than it otherwise might be. And this week we're looking at the 80s. Specifically, we're looking at E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
He's got a poop head and a long neck.
You weren't fucking kidding. You just laid it out on the table with that opening, huh?
I don't know, man. What this is gonna be a difficult one to talk about. Not for trauma reasons, not for political reasons, for it's a children's movie reason.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily even like a Pixar children's movie where we can wrap at the end here and be like, well, here's the themes, the central messages, the heart-wrenching moments, everything like that. And like this movie has themes. It has things that are ostensibly heart-wrenching moments, but this is a movie that has been culturally ripped apart and repurposed in so many ways for so many years that it's hard to really look at it, and it's not, this is not to say it's a bad movie per se, but it lacks a lot of the punch that it perhaps once did just through years of being ripped apart.
And you know, that's not to say, because I enjoyed the movie more than you did for sure. But yeah, like I can describe my grand insights about E.T. in like a sentence, in like a brief, by my standards, little spiel. Mostly I was kind of surprised that E.T. was the highest grossing 80s movie. I was surprised that it wasn't like a Star Wars or Indiana Jones sequel. And I think that's where most of my like thoughts have been coming from, sort of figuring out like what was it about E.T. that made it so clearly like the zeitgeist, because it has become sort of, as you say, because it's been picked apart by the vultures, it has become like the 80s movie. Like whenever you think about an 80s movie, whenever there's an 80s homage in movies, it's always kids on bikes in a little town, supernatural shenanigans. Like
it's Stranger Things. It's Stranger Things.
It's Stranger Things. It's fucking before Stranger Things there was Super 8. Even the It remake, like has parts of ET, granted more like horror. But I mean, Stranger Things is definitely the shining example of that, at least until it becomes Soviet espionage in season 3.
Shit's getting fucking wild. All right.
Yeah.
I have mixed, lukewarm feelings about Stranger Things, but there's no denying that it is fucking a wild show.
It is wild. As far as the movie, yeah, like thematically, it is pretty simple. It's basically Vin Diesel. It's all about the family. And nothing's more powerful than family. If you don't have a family, you die. And if you gotta be with your family and not abandon them. Oops, sorry, Spielberg. Sorry, your dad went out to get cigarettes and never came back.
That's a very quick and dirty synopsis of the themes of the film that I really have nothing to add to it. Obviously, I have some spoiler-ish stuff to add to that, but like from a non-spoiler perspective, yeah, I mean that's what fucking E.T.'s about. If you are unfamiliar, a quick synopsis of the plot on not the themes is that spacemen come to Earth, spacemen leave Earth, leave one spaceman behind, child finds spaceman, befriends spaceman, hijinks and government intervention ensue.
Yep.
That's E.T.
That's E.T. Even if you haven't seen E.T., you've seen E.T. I thought I hadn't, but I definitely have watched it all the way through at least once, but I was very young. And when I was young, I only liked cartoons, so I'm not surprised I didn't leave that big of an impression. But there were a lot of scenes I'm like, oh, wait, I do remember this part. Fuck.
It's kind of interesting because to explain my thoughts on it was I mostly found it kind of boring and in a way that I'm not really happy about. And I'll dig more into that in a minute here. But I know that I had watched this movie before watching this movie for the podcast. And about, I don't know, half an hour in, I remember looking at Sam and being like, I feel like I really didn't like this movie the first time I watched it. I don't know why we watched it, when we watched it. I don't know anything about that. I don't know if like one of us asked, because it was something that like I watched with my parents, but it clearly wasn't that big of a thing for my parents either because we don't talk about it. There's not like some cultural reference in our household. Like Ghostbusters is a thing that everyone still references, Neverending Story, stuff like that. The Princess Bride's a big one as well. So like there are a bunch of like 80s, 90s, that era of film that is a really big touchstone for my family. And this is a movie that we watched. I'm pretty sure it was my parents. It couldn't have been their first time watching it, but like, we have never referenced it since. It's just something that we saw and moved on from, which I think, as far as a recommendation, is about the most damning thing I can say about E.T. And it's not even that it's bad. It's just, it is the kids movie to end all kids movies. And it's the one that set off all this 80s revolution that led to Princess Bride, to Neverending Story, all these things. You can feel E.T. in those movies, but I feel like those movies took the core idea of E.T. and ran with it and pushed it even further than what E.T. did with it, and added heart in places, added some more humor, some things that land in better ways, some more interesting themes. And that, again, this is not to dig on E.T. It's just the first, and the problem with being the first is that so many other movies and ideas and media properties take your ideas and improve upon them.
Yeah, I have, like, as far as a recommendation, I mean, like I said, I enjoy the movie quite a bit more than you did, I think. And a lot of that just came down to, although I definitely had a lot of the same feelings, like, I wasn't by any means blown away or super enthralled. It worked the way it was supposed to for me. I think that, as far as a recommendation, if someone's like, should I watch E.T.? I'd be like, yeah, sure, why not? Like that sort of thing.
If you're looking for a Saturday night or something like that, I don't know, you could definitely do worse.
If you're like a parent, you want to park your kids in front of E.T. I mean, lots of people do that, and it worked out fine for them.
I will say, a lot of people also wrote articles about 20 years later being like, E.T. scarred the fuck out of me because it does look like a big poop with a long neck and is terrifying.
I do kind of love E.T.'s design. I love his ugly cute. I like that he purrs like a cat. I like his poop stretchy neck.
Hard disagree. What the fuck is wrong with you?
Because he's like, I don't know, as far as like an alien design, and this is sort of my feeling about the movie more broadly, I think, is that like E.T.'s supposed to be like, you know, the relationship between E.T. and Elliot is supposed to be cute. And like E.T.'s got the big old eyes and, you know, he kind of purrs like a cat. So he can be cute sometimes, but generally he's still like a weird alien poop man. And kind of like that, I think that, you know, the Spielberg's got a reputation for being real saccharine. And if, you know, you would think this would be the crowning example of that. But like, let's, you know, we're coming hot off of Jaws. Like he did Schindler's List, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, so let's pay deference to the GOAT, the man with like perhaps the greatest range in Hollywood of all time. So let's not ignore that. But even within the movie, I think that what surprised me, like once it got going, maybe not surprised, like pleasantly surprised, I suppose, was that I had kind of been prepared for like a total schmaltz fest, but it's E.T.'s a little edgier than you would expect, and part of that is just, you know, 80s kids movies were a little edgier than modern kids movies, but the way that this movie is edgy, I think, works in its favor as far as like resonance with the story, and that like when the family, you know, these sort of like family Vin Diesel movies can get real fucking saccharine about, you know, the family, and anyone with a family, which is everyone. Nobody has that perfect family situation because people are nightmares, and that doesn't, you know, that doesn't mean anything for the people that you're related to. They're nightmares. You're a nightmare. Everyone's a nightmare. And I think that, like, you know, this movie, because it's a kid's movie, it doesn't go super hard on that. And it still is about that more like sweet side. But what sort of got to me, or what struck me, was how human that like they let the mom be. And I think the moment where I really started to like give the movie more of a shake was when they were having like an argument at the dinner table. The kids were bickering, and the older brother, the little brother, I think it was Elliot, actually. I think it was
the little brother.
Yeah. And well, because I think it's not just the older brother, you know, it's the fucking like 8-year-old. And Elliot calls the older brother penis breath, which, you know, I mean, homophobic connotations, natch. But
also, before you continue, homophobic connotations, natch. It is a good fucking insult. If we can divest ourselves from those homophobic connotations, penis breath is just a good insult.
It rolls off the tongue. It really does.
Like when I think about penis breath, I'm like, okay, your breath smells like a penis, and my thought from there was not immediately like, okay, yeah, I get it. You know, there's an oral sex relation to that, and like obviously there's, as a man in the 80s, you don't want to be called like, just that idea of like your breath smells like a penis, not because of any particular source. Like, that's a good fucking insult. But then you have to include the fact that it is entirely based on homophobia, and it gets less fun.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. However, the thing that I really like about this scene, I mean, it's a couple things, right? It's the fact that it's the little brother, that it's, you know, sweet little Elliot, like culturally has become like this icon of childhood, you know, using this pretty crass, dirty insult toward his older brother, and that the fact that the mom like laughs at it, and that, like, you know, she's trying to like tell Elliot to stop, but she can't help herself. And that's the sort of interaction with a family that feels more natural and more realistic to me than just straight up like, Elliot, how dare you? And that's great. I like that. And I think that, you know, in particular, this movie, you know, if you're looking at it in the Spielberg canon, if you want to have more of an intellectual thing about it, I suppose this would be a good double feature with Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was Spielberg's, I believe, his first movie about like aliens and shit. And that's a good movie. I do think E.T. is better than that one. But famously, maybe the most famous thing about it is that the main character of Close Encounters, spoilers for Close Encounters, I guess it doesn't matter that much, but one of the most famous things about the movie, aside from him making a mountain out of mashed potatoes, is the main character abandons his family to fuck off with the aliens at the very end. And
are you saying there might be a trend here, a theme of some sort?
This movie almost feels like penance or more of a acknowledgement of that. This movie's got a lot in common with Close Encounters. I do think this one's better. It's got more of the characters feel more realistic. Having a little buddy to pal around with, I think, helps in that. But they do have a lot in common. And I think as far as like intellectually and like the Spielberg canon, if you're interested in that sort of thing, it's worth watching from that perspective alone. But yeah, I mean, just as a movie, ignoring all that shit, the fact that it is a little edgier, like you don't expect E.T. to get fucking smashed on Coors Light, and then, in a really great bit of, visual filmmaking, when we fully understand that E.T. and Elliot have like a psychic empathic connection when Elliot, 8-year-old, is now getting blitzed on Coors Light and like releasing all the frogs and starting fucking chaos in his school. Great scene, great moment. And that's the sort of like sly 80s Spielberg edge that keeps the movie from feeling too saccharine for me, because it's got that reputation and it does like lean into the schmaltz eventually, but I feel like the balance that's struck with like the humor and some of the more like honestly felt family stuff, I think balances it out. So I'm willing to go with the movie on that.
So I think that, interestingly enough, in direct relation to what you're saying, is that this movie is rated PG, which does mean that it's far more family focused. However, they do have like shit in it, like the word shit, not actual feces, as well as you implied, like some weird drinking shenanigans. There's some absolutely, kind of body horror shit with E.T. going on through it.
Yeah,
that's like really
it's
unpleasant.
Scary. Yeah.
And I want to say that like this is kind of amongst the last movies that would be able to get away with that and still be considered like a family film, because 2 years later is when the PG-13 rating got introduced. So this is kind of like in that golden spot of being able to push the boundary to still be a family-friendly movie when the only options are PG or R, because this is not getting an R rating for sure. But it's also definitely, in today's parlance, getting a PG-13 rating. It just happens to kind of slide under that radar because the PG-13 rating hadn't been invented yet. And I mean, honestly, probably should have for this movie. And if it were, this movie would have gotten a massive overhaul and scrubbed out all the things that make it less saccharine, the things that you're enjoying about it, and probably been a very different movie as a result.
I was just thinking, as you're saying this, has the PG-13 rating made us weak as a culture? That like,
This
PG...
is some insane shit that you are saying. This is like some fucking like red pill ass nonsense you're out here. The PG-13 rating has made us weak as a culture. Free speech. Fucking let kids watch anything that they want, and it will make us all stronger.
All right. I mean, I know that the phrasing was that way. I wanted to go for the bit, but hear me out. I think there is something to be said that we have with the PG-13, because you can't, if you make a movie PG-13, it's part of a marketing thing. Like if you make a movie that's as sweet as E.T. and you make it PG-13, like you're gonna lose out on a lot of money because
Can I shift this actually in a way that I think will underscore your point really well and really quickly?
Sure.
I don't think that the issue is necessarily with PG-13. I think the issue is with the MPAA more than anything. I think that the idea of a rating system for films works really well to kind of give you an idea of what you're going in for. And I think that the ambiguous system with which the MPAA does rate movies is far more the issue. And this can be seen none more apparently than with Eighth Grade, a movie that listen, the fact that I'm over here initially being like, yeah, what the fuck are you talking about? You sound like a goddamn MRA, or more of a libertarian, I suppose. But like backing off of that, like I have railed against the MPAA. I have, Eighth Grade is a movie that I absolutely adore, and it got rated R because eighth graders say the fuck word, something that eighth graders do all the time. I think that what we're seeing in E.T. is a far more honesty than we see in a lot of movies, because the MPAA is like, you can't say shit in these movies because children don't know what the shit word is, despite the fact that, especially if you have older siblings, you've definitely heard someone say shit before, and it's not gonna scar these kids for life. So to underscore what I'm saying, I think you're right. I think you're just the idea of the PG-13 rating, I think, is a good idea to kind of give people an expectation of what it's going to be. But the way that the MPAA handles it puts an overly sensitive attitude to the way that kids act, especially because when it comes to language, I think that the language is the big thing that the MPAA is like, what the fuck? You can't say shit in a kid's movie when, kids are hearing shit all the time. Who cares?
No, yeah, I think you're correct. I think it's less the rating system itself and more the arcane, dumb MPAA guidelines, which affect there's plenty of. As you say, like Eighth Grade's a good example. That's sort of those like boundary cases, usually about language, where if you try to portray life honestly, you're going to end up getting an unfavorable for marketing rating to seal off your audience. This is going to resonate with it the most.
Mm-hmm. And unfavorable for marketing is a sentence that should make everyone feel hollow inside. Before we get into spoilers, I want to talk a little bit about my reaction to the movie, because I mentioned that it was boring in a way that I didn't really want to admit to myself. Mostly because the way that my problems with the movie come, in my opinion, dangerously close to like a CinemaSins type nonsense, which is something that I find really upsetting about my viewing.
Listen, I'm gesturing towards like online, like right-wing rabbit holes. You're gesturing towards CinemaSins. Who really looks worse in this episode? Really?
This is where Beating a Dead Horse is going to take a hard about face from our nonsense that we usually have, gesturing far more towards a free and open understanding of films, less nitpicking, and also we're going to start railing really hard for capitalism and fascism. So, surprise! But no, my problem with the movie was mostly from a kind of plotting standpoint, which the reason that bothers me is that this is a kid's movie. Like the plot doesn't have to be super tight for kids to sit down and enjoy it. And in fact, I think that a looseness to a plot in a children's movie can do wonders for a children's enjoyment of a film. It allows for a little bit more imagination, a little bit more free flowing as kids watch this. But as an adult watching a kid's movie, and this is where I sound just like an absolute shithead, it can be a little frustrating.
Well, I'm going to back you up in a second. With a clear anecdote. So feel free. Go ahead.
Well, compared to something like The Princess Bride, a movie that is also ostensibly a kid's movie, but like is far more grounded in its storytelling. Like actions have consequences, which lead to further actions, which lead to further consequences. Whereas this movie, there are points where like you kind of retroactively put together the action that led to the consequence that is currently happening, rather than feeling a natural flow from point A to point B to point C. Like there are just scenes where things start happening and I'm like, wait, was this set up anywhere? Not really, but also I kind of see how we ended up here. So it wasn't that it wasn't set up, but like it felt like such a natural progression that you kind of didn't need to show the setup. But that's just not how the language of storytelling really works for the most part, unless you're doing something deeply avant-garde. And E.T. is not deeply avant-garde. It's a kid's movie. And, like, some places this does work. Like, when E.T. gets drunk and Elliot starts to feel it, that is really effective because there is a setup, there is a payoff, and it feels like a natural thing. Like, it's something that you're supposed to put together over the course of what is happening, just through going back to that $10 word, that Kuleshov effect of you see one scene transposed next to another, you're designed to put a connection between the two of them. There are just other scenes where like it goes from scene A to scene B, and it's not the flickering back and forth like it is in the Elliot getting drunk through E.T. scene, and instead just kind of like, all right, hang on. What did I miss something? Did I fall asleep for a second there? I feel like I missed like 30 seconds of the film that is just not there.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. And that, like, overall, like, this, I definitely felt this and I noticed it. It didn't bother me that much, though. I was usually like, okay, I guess we're doing this now. But there were a couple of times where I thought I sat on my PS4 controller and like accidentally scene skipped, and that, for the moment-to-moment pacing of a movie, you never want your audience to feel that way.
Yeah, and again, I don't think it's necessarily a terrible thing in a kid's movie, which is why I feel so just dirty ragging on this kid's movie for it. But here we are. I just think it's worth mentioning and like understanding that it is obvious. I mean, it's obviously not a perfect movie. There is no such thing as a perfect movie, but you know, here we are.
Except for Fern Gully.
I've never seen Fern Gully. I don't
think I have either. Robin Williams really believed in it, so that's a good endorsement.
I mean, that is fair, yeah. Are we ready to
He
get
believed in it more than he believed in Aladdin. Yeah, I'm ready for spoilers.
Well, as always, before we dive into spoilers, if you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. Tell a friend about us. It's the only way we grow. Follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. Jackson has a book.
I have a book called Kelly is Unbreakable. It is a YA novel. Speaking of more honesty and stuff, if someone made a screenplay of my book for language alone, it would probably get an R rating, despite that's how me and my friends talked as teenagers. So we're being suppressed.
That's actually a really good reference point as well. The fact that YA novels get away with so much more than YA movies.
Yes, that's true. Although I still wish YA would get away with a little more. That's why I went indie with this. But
that's fair. I mean, there's still a lot that he gets away with. I mean, depending on what genre you're pushing in. Like, I read some YA horror that was way worse than your book.
100%. But yes, so if you want something, honestly, I mean, it's got a little bit of E.T., older kids, with supernatural stuff. I mean, you fuck around with it. Buy it on Amazon.
You know what? I heartily endorse that. If you are interested for more E.T. adultness to it, yeah, go pick up Jackson's book. patreon.com/BADHcast if you want to support us. We got bonus episodes coming out here soon. Great stuff in the backlog. Next week, we're going to be talking about, for the second time on this podcast, because the first time it was definitely Jackson and I who were talking about Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. I'm excited to talk about it again.
I'm very excited to talk about it again. And it's funny because I never think of this as a 90s movie, and I guess it was 99.
Right on that cusp. Right on the cusp.
I kind of lump it in with like Spider-Man 1, those like turn of the millennium movies, even though that was a 2000s movie.
I mean, that's going to be an interesting point to look at it from, honestly. I think it sets the stage for some things to come. Let's get into spoilers on E.T., shall we?
Let's get into spoilers about E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
So, I guess to start things off, I just want to talk about a line. I don't necessarily even want to talk about this line. I just want to bring this line up because it was the most horrifying line in the entire movie. When the brother, discussing what E.T. is, drops the line, maybe it's an animal that wasn't supposed to live. A horrifying line to begin with. But then the camera pans away and like there's a light din, so you can't quite hear it, but it's definitely there, and it's definitely clear enough to hear that he goes, like those rabbits we saw that one time.
I completely forgot about this line. This one really stuck with you.
I wrote it down. I heard it. I lost my fucking mind. I wrote down the exact line as he said it because I'm like, what the fuck did you just say, E.T.? What the fuck did you just say?
Do you think they were like Dr. Moreau, like stitched together?
I don't know. What could he possibly mean by this? What does this mean?
Like a rabbit that got caught by a coyote and escaped, and it's like old and raggedy and punished, but it's alive. Like a punished snake rabbit.
No, I when you said punished, I got what you were going for. You didn't need to double down on the Metal Gear. I think our audience understands at this point what it means when you say punished.
Well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Well, on a serious though, is there anything that we want to particularly talk about with spoilers? I have a couple of notes that I want to kind of dive into a little bit, and I also want to drop to Jackson. A conclusion piece to this is something that I will tease here a little bit. Did you look into what the sequel for this movie was supposed to be at all?
I did not.
Oh boy, this is going to be a good wrap up. Then we'll end on that.
I was wondering about that too, because much like Jaws, I'm like that we haven't seen like an E.T. Returns is kind of shocking.
There's a reason for that, and we'll explore that in a minute here.
I do know that because Spielberg put the Yoda gag in here. I think in Phantom Menace, E.T.'s in the crowd. Yeah,
Sam was like, "Oh, is he looking at that because it's space like he sees an alien?" I'm like, "Well, yes, but then retroactively they actually made it so that E.T. would recognize Yoda because of how all of these things connect together in the Phantom Menace." And she's just like, "Sean, I hate that. I fucking hate that." She hates Star Wars, or she doesn't hate Star Wars, but she doesn't like Star Wars at the same time. So
does that mean that E.T. got cut down in Order 66?
That would imply that E.T.'s a Jedi, though, because Order 66 only culled the Jedi.
He's got the psychic powers.
But are those midichlorian type psychic powers, or are those...
I mean, if it's the Star Wars universe, I think they are.
Ooh, Jackson, we can't do this. This is not the purview of our podcast. This is some speculation ass nonsense here.
I'm just saying.
Okay, fine. If we were going to do this here, there is an argument to be made that the physiology of this species might enable itself to have telekinetic powers beyond the use of midichlorians within the Star Wars universe. Theoretically, yes, these creatures could be Jedi in that way. However, we don't necessarily understand the physiology of them, and so this sort of telekinetic power might be innate to all members of its species that don't require midichlorians to activate.
But isn't that also true of Yoda and Baby Yoda?
I don't know. We have only seen 2 of their species, and in fact, we've only seen 1.
No, we've seen 3. There's Yaddle.
Oh, right. Fuck, I forgot about Yaddle.
The most memorable character on the Jedi Council, Yaddle. The Dixie Kong of Yodas.
This is why we don't have these conversations.
Well, I mean, it's just because, like, as far as spoilers, again, as I've pretty much said all that I would want to say about E.T.'s plot and themes. I'm still more just puzzling, like, what was the zeitgeist here? Like, was it that there was that, like I wish I knew more about the cultural climate of
you ever feel like you were born in the wrong decade?
I mean, I was born in the decade that Ocarina of Time came out and Chrono Trigger. So no, I was born at precisely the correct decade. But with E.T., like, I know that the 80s culturally have sort of the broad reputation, not saying it's accurate. I know I got in trouble for saying this before. But broadly speaking, when people talk about the 80s, they tend to talk about it like the 50s 2.0. And with all that entails as far as like the social like makeup and the good old fashioned like family values of like Reaganism was the fact that E.T. was a little edgier and kind of about, it was this kid's movie but sort of about a broken home. Like, what was that? Did that resonate with audiences beyond the narrative that Reaganism was selling? Was that it?
I have no idea. I'm sorry.
I mean, I don't really either, because I honestly don't know. But that's kind of the best I can come up with. Otherwise, like, aside from that and just the pure marketing angle of like, well, older kids, you don't want to bring a younger kid to something like Empire Strikes Back or Indiana Jones. So even though those were big franchises with sequels, I also think sequels had a worse reputation back then.
Maybe. I mean, sequels gotta have had a pretty bad reputation for a bit now. I mean, I think the big change in sequel representation is, well, probably Fast and the Furious in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, honestly.
Well, that's what I was about to say, is that like I think sequels' reputations have actually gotten a lot better. Starting like Star Wars started this, but Lord of the Rings, I think, is really where this started to come in, because like it's funny.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I hadn't considered Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, because if you look at, I particularly think of Calvin and Hobbes. Like whenever Bill Watterson would like make fun of like shallow pop culture, he would always point to sequels. But that's less of a thing now. Like when people complain about sequels, it's in that very particular, like, we're trying to make a cinematic universe out of like Alf. Like some absurd, like...
I'm sorry, you literally just looked over Independence Day. You had Independence Day right there. We just talked about it, and you went with Alf.
I mean, if we're talking about 80s, I don't know. But you're right, Independence Day is a better example. But Independence Day is like, when we talk about shitty sequels, it's usually like... pathetic reboots like Independence Day, more so than like there's less of the except in the realm of like horror, I guess there's less of the like Jaws 2, there's less of that.
It's far more about like expanding on characters and motivations and ideas rather than just like, oh, this was a hit, let's do it again type of thing.
Yeah, and I think at the core, there's still a lot of that in terms of the way these movies are made, but I don't think audiences necessarily perceive it that way anymore. I know I tend to not, unless it's really blatant like Independence Day.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think we have gotten way more accepting of sequels on the whole.
Yeah, and I think that like Empire Strikes Back was probably the beginning of that process, and like Empire Strikes Back and like Godfather of like, oh, like a sequel can be a real movie. And then I think by the time Lord of the Rings, I think that that was a cultural shifting point for a lot of reasons. Those movies,
especially since it was aided by the fact that it was originally a trilogy. But I feel like that kind of helped wiggle the way into sequels being actual things, because like, oh, this is actually part of something, and then they realize that, wait, we can make more of the same, and as long as it feels like it's a continuation of the story and not, oh no, there's a second shark. What?
The shark is. I love that the plot of Jaws 4 is that the shark. This is a throwaway line in Jaws 2, apparently, that Brody's like, can a shark feel a desire for vengeance? And they're like, you're crazy, Brody, it's a fucking shark. But that is the plot of Jaws 4.
Oh my god, that's incredible.
The shark is specifically hunting down members of the Brody family.
Oh my god, it's like fucking Dio the shark. I made the JoJo reference this time. Come at me. When you're done cackling, I do have a little bit of thematic things that I want to talk about left in this movie before would be a good segue to talk about the E.T. sequel and the nonsense that it spawned. But I do have a little bit that I want to talk about.
Yeah, go over. Like I was saying, I don't have a grand thesis about why this hit the zeitgeist. Like thematically, that borderline like counterculture package in a sweet wrapper is the best I can come up with. Otherwise, I have to imagine it's just the business of like bringing the amount of younger kids and parents enjoying the movie and coming back, and maybe the sequel bias. That's all I got, though.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that those all make some sense, and I think that it also does kind of lean into why we don't hear as much about E.T. anymore on the whole. Like it just didn't. It was a big flash in the pan, and like it's still clearly a touchstone, but it's not a touchstone that people are like, you have to go watch E.T. as an important piece of media. It's more like we are seeing people who watched E.T. take that and turn it into other things nowadays, like the Duffer Brothers and Stranger Things.
Yep.
So the one thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit, and I don't know if you picked up on this, but something that I noticed and kind of have been trying to unpack as an idea and how it relates to Spielberg's idea for this movie essentially was that his parents went through a divorce, and depending on like what source you're reading, E.T. might have been one of his own imaginary friends, but like brought to life in the context of this film. So the one thing that I noticed watching this film is that aside from the core family, you never really see any adult faces throughout a vast majority of the film. The teacher is shot from the neck down. All shots of like where there could be adults are shot from a distance to it, so you're not actually looking at any of them. Even when the government shows up, it's very much from an upper angle, so you can't actually see any of them.
Cloaked in shadow for them most of the time. I love this, by the way. I was sad when we gave up this bit.
Well, no, I think that this is what makes it interesting, because there does come a time when the bit is given up and faces are revealed from adults, and that's at the same time that E.T. dies. It's not
the coming of age thing. Yeah.
It's basically E.T. dying, and like I had looked at it as a coming of age. I mean, I guess the way I have it interpreted is also a coming of age, but like in a slightly different way.
Yeah,
and that like E.T.'s death, if we were reading this as a continuation of Spielberg's own imaginary friend and the divorce, like this dying of the imaginary friend kind of opens you up to seeing the people that have been around you this whole time. The removing of the face mask of like, oh, these are people, and like actual people within the world, not just faceless husks that maneuver around me, which works on your level as like a literal coming of age. It is a far cleaner way of explaining what I'm trying to get at here than me being like, it's the death of an imaginary friend and an awakening of the rest of the world, which is just a coming of age.
As much as I was like, intoning like, ooh, I miss this goes away. I do understand like why we ditch this element for precisely that reason. I think it's also interesting that when we do get human faces on like the government, like they're not as sinister or shitty as like we might have anticipated they might be. So they're I mean, I do appreciate that sort of, that a dose of reality doesn't always mean that the adult world is cruel, just that it's more beyond our understanding. When I say that I'm sad we got rid of that, it's more that I love that Charlie Brown-esque bit. And like my gut reaction was that I was sad. But I mean, it does work for the movie, what they did.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and I kind of like the way it lands. Again, it's that kind of Spielberg idea that I really, really appreciate, despite the fact that I wasn't as big of a fan of this movie on the whole. Like, I think that it definitely has Spielberg written all over it, especially watching Jaws and seeing how masterful he is with like his positioning of cameras. And obviously, like, it's not entirely him, but like how he wants those to be structured for the shots and everything. Like, I think that works really, really well, and I would really appreciate that. It also kind of explains why the people who come to pick up E.T. are literally just in spacesuits and not hazmat suits. Fuck, when the astronaut burst through a fucking window was one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life.
It was real fucking funny. I forgot about this. Because I always, when I think about this movie, like, I remembered, I definitely had seen the whole thing when I was a kid, because I would remember scenes, but I would remember them in hazmat suits, like more like they are after they actually get it. Somebody shows up in the space, I'm like, ah!
Yeah, I thought it was like some hallucination at first, like not a real thing. And then more of them start showing up and like people react. And I'm like, oh, so these are literally just NASA astronauts in their NASA astronaut suit bursting through windows to grab ET. Why are they not in hazmat suits? And I mean, the answer is thematic, but it doesn't make it less silly.
Is also silly.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Wouldn't change it for the world.
Speaking of great and silly.
All right, lay it on me. Give me E.T. Return.
E.T. No. E.T. returns, but not in the sequel. When E.T. steps out of the van and looks like fucking the second coming of Jesus Christ. Like, that is some religious ass imagery, and it is very strange.
Spielberg has even said, like, people are like, what the fuck was with that Jesus E.T. shot? He's like, man, I don't know. Like, don't tell my Jewish mom. She'd be very upset by that.
I did not put together that Spielberg was Jewish, which makes that shot even funnier, because it's clearly like the thing where I've seen religious imagery before but don't fully understand the context of it. I'm going to use it in this movie. And then we did. And as someone who was raised Catholic, I look at this and be like, so I mean, technically, E.T. did die and came back to life, which does line up with the Jesus metaphor. But are we implying that Jesus is an alien in this? Is that the implication here?
Well, I was about to say this shot had a profound impact on at least one audience member, young audience member. That kid's name was Zack Snyder.
I fucking knew that's where you were going with that. Oh my God. Especially, he's got the fucking like red heart for it too. Like that goddamn Sacred Heart ass Mother Mary imagery. Oh.
But after you said about Jesus being an alien, old Ridley Scott was clearly taking notes too.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a bit of horror to Ridley Scott in that way that bucks the trend a little bit.
I just like how in an interview, Ridley Scott had said, yes, Jesus was an engineer. So I like the idea that, we have Jesus running around as this 7-foot bloomin'.
All right, are we ready to dive into the bizarro world of ET2?
Yes, please give it to me. I'm salivating at the thought.
I am going to pretty much be reading whole cloth from this AV Club article titled, "If You Were Scarred by ET as a Kid, Just Be Thankful the Sequel Never Got Made," from Reed McCarter, published on February 24th, 2021. It was this year that this article got published. So fucking brace yourselves. I'll also link it down below, but I'm literally just going to be reading whole cloth because it's insane and they put it better than I possibly could. So first of all, you know what? I'm gonna open it up to you. What do you think a sequel to E.T. would be called?
Honestly, I mean, maybe because Superman Returns hadn't come out, but that's my gut instinct is like E.T. Returns.
You could not be further from it if you tried. I opened this to you knowing that you weren't going to get it. ET2 was called ET2 Nocturnal Fears.
What?
Yup.
All right, I need to tell me more, good sir.
The pitch is as follows. The first movie's kids are lonely without their old pal E.T., but hopeful they'll be reunited with the tiny freak again one day soon. Obviously, the author took some editorializing here.
Yeah.
But like that, that right off the bat, I'm on board. That makes sense. That's an E.T. movie right there, toe to tip. Their wishes seem to come true and they end up finding an alien ship. Again, all right, I'm on board here. E.T. sequel makes sense. Unfortunately, the treatment tells us the aliens on board are, all caps, evil.
Oh my God, it's a fucking ship full of xenomorphs. It's a ship full of aliens.
They're also albino carnivores with big red eyes and fangs who are at war with E.T.'s people and have arrived on Earth to mutilate cattle and torture the kids for information on their enemies' whereabouts.
This sounds based as fuck.
During all of this, Elliot experiences quote-unquote tremendous pain and screams so loudly that his agony is heard throughout the universe. This brings E.T. back to save the human children from what we can only assume is dispassionate alien murder.
That's amazing.
It also reveals that E.T.'s actual name is Zrek. Z-R-E-K.
No. Better check yourself before you Zrek yourself.
So in case you're wondering why we didn't get ET2, that's the reason. Spielberg looked at that and went, maybe this is too dark, and shelved it.
Give me that. Start from, ET2, but make it like a Coen Brothers directed drama about like grown up Elliot.
It's the Machete to Spy Kids.
Yeah, exactly. Give me that. That sounds amazing.
Oh my God. So yeah, that's the plot of ET2 Nocturnal Fears.
Nocturnal Fears.
That sounds like a fucking Freddy sequel.
His scream is heard throughout the universe.
And it brings E.T. back. Oh my God. Could you imagine, though?
There's no way they would have greenlit that. The suits would have been like, get back in your fucking hole, Spielberg. Try again.
I mean, the problem is, though, is that it's Spielberg. What if they did? What if they're like, nah, we trust Spielberg? Because at this point, he had Jaws, he had E.T., he had some hits on his hand.
He did, but I would have to assume that even though they were like all reliable, like I feel like even someone with that similar level of caliber, at least when it comes to like mainstream like blockbusters, I feel like directors, even big important ones, still get told no, probably more than we think.
Probably, but like
some of them don't, though. I don't know. Like, you could be right that Spielberg could have had his auteur license at this point, because I mean, nobody told Hideo Kojima no about anything after Metal Gear Solid 3, and that was
he's releasing a director's cut of Death Stranding already, baby.
Yeah, so nobody told George Lucas no, but George Lucas was also basically an indie, which is a strange thing to say, but it's kind of true.
Yep.
So this might have been early enough in his career where the suits were like, especially because E.T. was such like a family hit, where they'd be like, no, we're not going to let this happen.
Listen, I just need to hold on to that hope that one day E.T. might return and torture some fucking kids.
Tear Elliot's brain out with his psychic powers.
God. My final note before we wrap up here is, in the language of the film, is space Mexico? Is Mexico space?
Maybe. I wouldn't be shocked. I'm pretty sure that like around that time would be when like alien in terms of the immigration sense was starting to be more widely used. I wouldn't be shocked. Yeah.
I just was kind of laughing at how hard they're like, he ran away with a woman to Mexico like multiple times.
And yeah, that's that would not surprise me at all. That would not surprise me in the slightest.
Yeah. So I mean, there's that was just something that kind of stuck out with me of like, that's kind of a weird parallel that this movie seems to be kind of quietly making, but I don't know. Spielberg gonna Spielberg.
I mean, E.T. ran out for cigarettes and never came back.
And I think it's time for me to go out for a pack of cigarettes myself. I'm Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda.
And I'm Jackson Keller. You can buy my book, Kelly is Unbreakable, on Amazon.com. There's a link to it, order on my website, jacksonjkeller.com. I started blogging again for myself, basically. There's a long rant about how much I hate the fucking internet.
It's peak Jackson, I can tell you that much. Follow the Twitter at BADH_cast on Twitter. Did I say follow the Twitter on BADHcast? Twitter?
I think you were fine.
I mean, well,
my
now
brain
I
might have
mentioned
broke
it,
too.
I guess I'm keeping it in, so y'all can laugh at me. Patreon.com/BADHcast. We have a bonus episode planned for this month. Get hyped for that shit.
Ooh.
As always, please go support us to get a bunch of backlog of bonus episodes. We got new bonus episodes coming out every month. You should absolutely be checking that shit out. And also, thanks to our $10 patrons.
Thank you so much, Julia, Travis, Pat, Mom, Aunt Summer. Welcome back. Now that the money's flowing, you're getting your meme shout outs.
Also, thanks to Lords of the Highway for your theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out however you can. Buy their music, stream their music. They're on Spotify, Bandcamp, all those places. Go check them out. Also, thanks to 5 Years Later site.com. There's a button of us in the corner that you can click on, but you should also check out all of the writing that people are doing over there. There's a lot of really talented people doing a lot of really talented shit. Go read it. Next week, we are, for the second time on this podcast, revisiting Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
Oh, get hype. Get hype. You think that Phantom Menace discourse is done? Phantom Menace discourse will never be a memory.
And I guess to tickle the balls a little bit about next week, Jackson and I might come into this with some apologia for it. We kind of both have a faint appreciation for those original.
I'm definitely coming in with at least some apologia. It's not a question of if I'll come in with it. It's a question of how much.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild episode if y'all are fans of Star Wars. Tune in for that one. Bye.
Don't you go.